We're going to start off, we're going to go to File, Open. If your Lesson 1 folder is not already open, go to your desktop and open Project Files and then the Lesson 01 folder. One of the new features of Excel 2007, Microsoft offers 3 file types. XLSX and XLSM files are much better than the legacy XLSB format because they're smaller and less prone to corruption. Personally, I almost always use the XLSM version of the files as it allows me the flexibility to record a quick macro if necessary. Although you will see me working with both XLSX and XLSM files in this training series, we'll only include regular XLSX files for all the lessons in this training, except Lesson 6. Just note that you will not be able to record any macros in the project files without converting them to XLSM files first. Other than the file name extension, your files are the same as mine. In Lesson 6, you'll have XLSM files that are ready for macro recording. And in Lesson 1, we're going to open the first file, the Advanced Subtotals topic. Advanced Subtotals are a feature that have been added back in Excel 97 and really one of the very powerful ways to quickly summarize data. The Advanced Subtotals feature allows you to take your data set and very quickly add a subtotal for every customer, every region, every product, whatever you need to do. Now, in order to make subtotals work, the data has to first be sorted by that field. So we have a data set here with region, product, date, account, customer, quantity, revenue, cost of goods sold, and profit. And let's say that we want to create a summary by customer. The first thing we would have to do is sort the data by customer. Now, because my data has a heading above every row, I'm able to use the quick way to sort data. First, select a single cell. It has to be a single cell in the customer column, and then go to the Data tab of the ribbon. On the Data tab of the ribbon, we have 2 buttons, the A to Z and Z to A buttons that will sort either ascending or descending. I'm going to choose the A to Z button. And you'll see that our data is now sorted with the first customer alphabetically at the top. Now, before the subtotals command came along, if we needed to add a subtotal for every customer, it would have been really quite tedious. We would have had to hit page down and then find the break between the customers. We could use the insert row command to add a new customer, and then the AutoSum function in order to add the totals. You can imagine that if you had 100 or 300 or 500 customers, this would be a very, very tedious operation. Luckily, we don't have to go through those steps. We can create them all in one command using the automatic subtotals command. To start with automatic subtotals, make sure that you have one cell in your data set selected, and on the data ribbon, use the subtotal icon. The subtotal dialog box appears, and initially it always wants to subtotal by each change of the leftmost column. Now in our case, that's the region column. And then it will always want to add the sum function to the field that is the rightmost column. In this case, that's the profit column. Now, of course, none of this matches the task that we want to use today, so we're going to modify some settings in the subtotal dialog box. In the first drop-down, at each change in region, we're going to choose that we want to subtotal at each change in customer. You always want to make sure and look at the use function drop-down. Excel has very strange rules. If the rightmost column happens to be a column that contains text, or even a column that contains blanks, Excel will choose to count instead of to sum. This can cause unexpected results, so always make sure that the second drop-down says sum. And then you have to go through and select the fields that you want to add the subtotals to. In this case, it would make sense to do it to profit, as they suggest, but also cost of goods sold, revenue, and quantity. There's a setting at the bottom of the dialog box for a page break between groups. If you wanted every customer to have its own report, you could choose that option, but right now we're just going to click OK and watch how fast Excel can add the subtotals. There, in just a matter of seconds, Excel has gone through and added subtotals. Let me page down so we can see the break between the first and second customer. There in row 67, Excel automatically inserted a new row for us and added the subtotal commands in columns F, G, H, and I. You'll see in row 72 that Excel added a new total for the next customer, and as I page down through the data set, you'll see that Excel has added subtotals throughout the data set. You'll have to admit that this is much easier than adding subtotals the old way. Basically, in one command, we were able to add 20, 30, 40, 50 subtotals in seconds instead of the process that would normally take hours. Now, once the subtotals are in, there's many very powerful features that we have. The first thing that you have to notice is that there are group and outline buttons to the left of column A. There's 3 new buttons there, the 1, 2, and 3 buttons. And I'm going to press the 2 button to show you the customer summary that we'll get. When I press the number 2 button, I see just the customer subtotals. This is a great report to print to give to your manager if you need to see totals by customer. There's also a number 1 button. When I press that button, you'll see just the grand total. Now, this seems a little silly to me and not quite as useful. When you press the number 3 Group and Outline button, Excel shows you all of your detail rows again. Now, there's many tricks that we have when you have the dataset collapse to show the number 2 Group and Outline button. When I first saw automatic subtotals, I was so happy that we had this data. I said, certainly we'd be able to take this customer data and copy it to a new worksheet where I would have just the customer totals. However, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. If I choose the dataset and then use Control-C to copy, create a new workbook, and then Control-V to paste, unfortunately, Excel brings all of the detail rows that were hiding behind the subtotals. This is so frustrating that Excel could give us something as powerful as subtotals, but not a good way to copy just the subtotal rows. Well, it turns out that there is a way, although it's very, very, very obscure. Let me return back to my original data set. And again, the trick is that we need to select the customer totals, including the heading in E1 down to the grand total in row 592. Once we have that data selected, there's a few different ways to select just the subtotal rows. The first method, which is more intuitive but is certainly harder to remember, is to go to the Home ribbon. On the Home ribbon, on the right-hand side, we have the Find and Select dropdown. In the Find and Select dropdown, there's a choice for Go to Special. The Go to Special dialog is one of the most powerful dialog boxes, and it's really hidden. The Go to Special dialog box allows you to, for example, choose all of the cells that have formulas, all of the cells that are blanks, all of the cells that are precedents of the current cell, the last cell in a data set, or what we need in this very case is visible cells only. Now, when I select visible cells only, you can barely make out that Excel has added little white bands between the hidden rows. This is saying, hey, there's data back here that's hidden that's currently not in our selection. Now, when I use Control-C, you'll actually see that we've selected just the individual rows. I can now go to my new workbook and paste to get just the customer totals. Now, what you find interesting is, of course, they changed those live formulas in the customer total lines to be values. And when you think about it, really, that's the only choice that Microsoft had when they're taking just the customer total rows. So, very cool way to take just the customer totals from the number 2 Group and Outline button and get them out here to a brand new worksheet. You can now send this worksheet off to a manager or to whoever needs to see totals by customer. Let me switch back to my original data set. Some other uses for the visible cells only are when we want to create a special format on just the total rows. Let's take a look at all the detail rows again. You'll see that we have subtotals in row 67 and row 72. I've worked for managers who have said, we really want to have all of those rows in bold or bold in a larger font or something like that. It would be very frustrating to go through and have to format each one of those rows individually. It would take almost as long as adding the subtotals individually. If you hit the number 2 Group and Outline button and then attempt to format the subtotal rows in this 2 view of our subtotals, you'll find that actually the formatting you apply happens to all of the hidden rows as well. So you may apply bold to row 67 through row 592, and even though you're just seeing the subtotal rows, you're actually applying bold to everywhere. So the best way to format just the subtotal rows is, again, to select only the visible cells using visible cells only. Now, if you wanted to, you could go back to Find and Select, Go to Special, Visible Cells Only. But I'm going to show you a great shortcut that you can learn to basically eliminate that whole hassle of going to Find and Select, Go to Special, Visible Cells Only. Okay, now to start, we want to start from the first customer total in E67 and select all the way down to the last grand total in I592. I'm going to click in E67 and use a cool set of shortcut keys to be able to select all of that data. After selecting the first cell, I'm going to hold down the Shift key on the keyboard and hit the End key followed by the down arrow key. This will take me to the last row. The End key followed by the right arrow key will take me to the last column of the contiguous data set. Now remember, if we applied any formatting now, we'd be applying formatting to both the subtotal rows that we can see and all of the detail rows hidden behind. So we need to select just the visible cells only. Again, as I said, we could go back to the Find and Select and through Go to Special and Visible Cells Only, but the great shortcut, the shortcut that's been around forever and not very many people know, is to hold down the Alt key on the keyboard and hit the semicolon. Alt semicolon is the shortcut for using Go to Special Visible Cells Only. Great way to select just the visible cells. Now that we've selected this data, we can format it however we'd like using all of the commands on the Home tab of the ribbon. For example, if we needed to apply bold, we could choose the B icon to apply bold everywhere. You'll see that the first time that we selected bold, it actually unselected because our active cell was on a bold cell. We could also make the font size larger or change the fill color or change the font color. I've worked for managers who said that we had to make all of our totals be 12 point in bold with a blue font and a light blue background. No matter what kind of crazy request your manager can come up with, you can apply the formatting at this point. Now watch what happens when I hit the number 3 Group and Outline button to be able to see all of our detail rows. There you have it. All of the detail rows are still in the original font, and the new subtotals have been formatted. We're able to do that by selecting the visible cells only. Again, the shortcut is either Alt semicolon or using on the Home tab, find and select Go to Special Visible Cells Only, whichever way is easier for you to remember. Now that we've added all these subtotals in, you might be wondering, how do we get rid of the subtotals? Do we have to go through and delete row 67 and then row 72 and all the way down the data set? That could take just as long as adding the subtotals manually. Well, it's completely counterintuitive, but to get rid of the subtotals, we actually have to go back and pretend like we're adding subtotals again. You'll see that we still have the total rows selected from when we formatted the totals. I'm going to select a single cell in my data set. Doesn't matter which cell, it just has to be one cell. And then we're going to go to the Data tab of the ribbon. And on the Data tab, use the subtotal command. In the subtotal dialog box, it remembers all of our settings from before, but we're not going to pay attention to any of those settings. We're going to go to the lower left-hand corner and choose the box that says Remove All. That will remove all of our subtotals and get us back to the original data set. Now, there's special logic that you have to use when you need to add more than one set of subtotals to the data set. Let's say that our manager asks for a summary by region and product. The first thing we're going to have to do is make sure that the data is sorted by product within region. The next thing we're going to have to do is make sure that we add the subtotals to the outermost field first. In this case, that's the region field. Now, to sort by two different fields, I could use the sort command on the dialog box, but instead, I'm actually just going to do two sorts, sorting by the inner field first, the product field, and then the region field. Select one cell in the product field. Click the A to Z button on the data ribbon. Next, select one cell in the region column. And again, click the A to Z button on the data ribbon. We've now sorted this data set so that way the regions are sorted into central, east, west sequence. Within the central region, we have the first product, the second product, and the third product. We're now ready to add two sets of subtotals. Adding the first set of subtotals is just like adding the customer subtotal. We will select a single cell in the data set, and then from the data ribbon, choose the subtotal command. This time, instead of suggesting the subtotal by the leftmost column, it's remembering the last column that we subtotaled by. So we want to change at each change in customer to be the region field. All of the other settings that are remembered from the last time are correct, so click OK to add totals by customer. Well, Excel basically just added 3 rows for us, a central total, an east total, and a west total. We now need to add subtotals by product. Again, you want to make sure that only one cell is selected, which it is, and go to your subtotal command on the data ribbon. This time, we're going to say at each change in product instead of each change in region. And the most important part of adding a second set of subtotals is in the lower half of the subtotals dialog box. We want to uncheck the box for Replace Current Subtotals, and then move to the OK button. Excel has now added 2 sets of subtotals for us. The first thing you'll notice is that we have 4 Group and Outline buttons to the left of column A. If I click the number 3 button, we'll see totals by region and product. If I choose the number 2 button, we'll see just totals by region. And if I click the number 1 button, we'll see still the completely useless grand total. Of course, pressing the number 4 button will show us all of the detail rows. You could carry this concept on to add additional subtotals for other rows that you have. For example, if we needed to see subtotals by customer within product within region, we could continue doing the same steps, hitting the subtotal button and saying that we want to add subtotals and not replacing the current subtotals. Okay, now I'm going to remove these subtotals and show you a couple last tricks before we move on from the subtotals command. Remember, to remove the subtotals, we want to choose the subtotal icon and click Remove All. There's a couple requests that I occasionally get in my power seminars that seem very simple, but actually are very, very hard to pull off. One request that comes up a lot is people will say that we want to add a blank row after every subtotal. Let me quickly add subtotals by customer. I choose one cell in the customer region and click the A to Z button to sort by customer. I'll move to the subtotal command and say at each change in customer, and leave the rest of the settings the way they are. Click OK, and Excel will add our customer totals for us. Now the hard part is, how do we add a blank row after every subtotal row? There really is no good way to do this. And if you actually have to give the file to your manager, he will see that you're doing a little bit of cheating in this next trick, but if you're only going to be printing out the report, no one will know that you didn't really add the totals in. The first step is we want to collapse to see just the two group and outline button. And we want to select just the customer total. So I'm going to select from E67 down to I592. Now, if I would change the row height, at this point, I've actually changed the row height up at the detail rows as well, so I need to select just the visible cells only. Again, the shortcut for that is Alt semicolon. I'm going to apply a row height here, and that's located on the Home tab of the ribbon. On the right-hand side, you'll see the Format drop-down, and then choose row height. We start out with a row height of 12.75, and I want to double that to about 25.5. Excel has now made our rows double high, but we still need to do one more thing to complete this trick. If I would show the detail rows, you would see that the subtotal actually appears underneath a blank. So there'd be a detail row, a blank, and then the subtotal. We need to move the subtotals up so that way they are at the top of all of these cells. Now, this was a very hard thing to do in Excel 2003, but Microsoft has added a button right to the Home ribbon to allow us to change the vertical alignment of all the selected cells. It's right underneath the word Data in the ribbon, the three vertical align buttons. You'll see that currently we are bottom aligned. I need to choose top align. That will complete the trick. Now, when I go back to the 3 view to see all of our detail rows, you'll see that it appears that after each subtotal, there is a blank row. You can print this out, and people will believe that you actually inserted the blank rows. Only you and I know that it's not really happening. Now, one more trick in automatic subtotals comes up sometimes if you have data that covers a long period. Sometimes what will happen is we'll have one account number. Through a merger and acquisition, the customer name changed during the course of the data set. In that case, you would not want a subtotal by customer because you would end up with 2 totals for that customer, one with the old name and one with the new name. I'm going to remove these subtotals and add new subtotals by the account field. Select a single cell in your data set and then go to the Data tab of the ribbon and choose the subtotals command. Click Remove All to remove the current subtotals. We need to make sure that the data is now sorted by account, so choose one cell in the account column and click the A to Z button. Choose the subtotal command again and say at each change in account, use the sum function to add the subtotal to the same field as before. Click OK, and Excel has now added one subtotal for every unique account number. Now this works out great until you go to the number 2 group and outline button. If you're a heavy-duty data analyst, there's a good chance that you've remembered that A106 is a particular customer, but whatever manager you give this report to will have no clue what those customer numbers really mean. We need to find a way to copy the customer name down from the row above. Again, we're going to use the visible cells only trick, this time in column E. I'm going to select from E67 down to the last customer total in 591. Again, I want to select visible cells only using Alt semicolon. You'll notice that I'm currently in cell E67, and I want to add a formula here that's going to point to E66. Using the keyboard, I'll type equal E66. I want to add this exact same formula to all of the cells in the selection, so instead of hitting Enter, I'll use Control Enter, and Excel automatically copies the customer total down from the row above. Let's take a look by hitting the number 3 group and outline button. And you'll see that the formula in row 72 for Amazing Chopstick is basically taking the value from E71. Great way to very quickly copy fields that are not in your subtotal down to the subtotal rows to help those who are reading the report when it's in collapsed mode. Well, there you have it, the automatic subtotals command, along with many additional features that you can use in the command. Being able to format just the subtotal rows, being able to copy just the subtotal rows, and the special tricks that you need to do when you need to add subtotals by multiple columns. Okay, so at this point we have to close the file, which normally in any former version of Excel would have meant going to the File Close menu. The one annoying thing here in Excel 2007 is we no longer have a file menu. Instead, we just have a round ball with an office icon. I don't know what I'm supposed to call this. In the original beta versions, when I was working with the beta versions of Excel 2007, it actually said File. So in my head, I still think File Close. But if I tell you to do File Close, there is no word File. I think Microsoft is calling this the office icon. If you want, we could call it the icon formerly known as File, or let's just call it File. So we're going to go to File Close to close the file. In this case, I don't need to save the changes, so I'll click No. Wow, and there's some other data back there. So let me close the other files. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is data consolidation. So on the File menu, let's open the second file. On the desktop, we'll choose Project Files, Lesson 1, and then the consolidation file. Now, data consolidation is not as cool as the advanced subtotals function. It's actually been around forever. It's very good in a couple of limited uses. In this case, we have account number in column A, customer number in column B, quantity, revenue, cost of goods sold, and profit. The consolidation command is great for summarizing data by exactly one field. So I can choose to summarize the data, let's say, by customer, and automatically get totals for quantity, revenue, cost of goods sold, and profit. The consolidation command is located on the data ribbon in the Data Tools group. In order to use the command, you have to start in a blank cell that has plenty of space both below and to the right. So I'll choose cell H1 and go to the consolidate command. Now in the consolidate dialog box, we have to specify a reference, and the most important part about this reference is that the leftmost column has to be the data that we're attempting to summarize by. Since I'm trying to create a summary by customer, I'll start in cell B1 and use the end and down arrow key, end and right arrow key, while holding down the shift key to select all of the cells in my data set. You'll see that Excel records the references B1 to F564. Now the important part here is we need to check the two boxes in the lower left-hand corner. Use labels in top row and left column. That tells Excel that rather than summarizing all of the data, we want one row for every value in the leftmost column and one column for every value in the first row. Click OK, and I'll hit the down arrow here so we can see the result. There are a couple of frustrating things with the consolidate command. The first thing that I don't like is that they don't put the heading in above the leftmost column. I really would like to have the customer heading copied to cell H1. The other thing that is a little frustrating is that the result set is not sorted in any particular manner. The customers appear exactly as they originally appeared in column B. To solve this, we'll want to add the customer heading in H1 and then use the A to Z button in the data ribbon in order to sort our data. There you go. We now have a very small data set that shows every customer exactly once and the quantity, revenue, cost of goods sold, and profit. Now this was a very simple use of the consolidation. Sometimes we have a more complicated situation, like for example if we wanted to consolidate for every account number. If we consolidated based on columns A through F, there is a column right in the middle that is not numeric. Excel has no clue what to do when we ask it to summarize the customer field, and so we're going to get blanks. Let me remove this consolidation area and we'll try and consolidate again, this time consolidating from column A through column F. I'll delete those columns. And again, I want to select a single cell in my output range. Choose the consolidate command from the data ribbon. The second time that you do a consolidation in the same Excel session, Excel remembers the previous reference, and that's a real problem if you're trying to do a different reference. The best choice is to delete the first reference and enter a new reference. So I'll click the old reference, click the delete button, and now it's as if we started the consolidate command from scratch. Click in the reference field, And again, I'm going to start this time in cell A1, hold down the Shift key, use end down, and then end right. Click the Add button, click the OK button, and well, one of the natural ways to summarize data in Excel is to use functions. I'm not just talking about the sum function, I'm talking about more powerful functions like the SUMIF function that allows us to conditionally calculate. Let's open the next project file. Open the SUMIF file. Now this is a simple data set with region, product, date, quantity, unit price, unit cost, revenue, and cost. And we want to be able to create some conditional sums of this data. I'll hit the end down key to go down to the end of my data set, and we'll see that we have 45 rows of data plus a heading for row 46. If I'd like to build a table underneath this data set with total revenue for each region, Central, East, and West, let me arrow down a little bit, and you'll see that we have the beginning of this table already built. Select cell C49 where we'll build a SUMIF function in order to summarize data for just the East region. The function that we want to use is the SUMIF function, so every formula in Excel has to start with the equal sign. Type the equal sign and type SUMIF, and you'll see that new in Excel 2007, the autocomplete gives us a list of all the functions that start with SUMIF. In this case, we want to use the original SUMIF function. Later on in this lesson, we'll learn about the new SUMIFs function. Type the opening parentheses, and Excel tells us that first, we want to look through a particular range. And so that's the range in our data set that contains the regions. In this case, that would be A2 through A46. I'm going to select that by first clicking on A46 and then using the Shift and up to select the range. A2 to A46. Now I want to make sure that as I copy this formula later, I always point to A2 to A46. So I'm going to hit the F4 key to make that an absolute reference. You'll see that Excel adds the dollar signs in. Type the comma, and next Excel says that we're looking for the criteria. The criteria is what value we're trying to match in our region field. That field is immediately to the left of where I'm entering the formula, so I'll use the left arrow key to highlight cell B49. As I copy this formula down, I want to allow this reference to point to B50 and B51, so no dollar signs here. Type a comma, and Excel says that we now need the sum range. The sum range has to be the exact same shape as the first argument, and it should be the column that you're trying to sum. In our case, that's the revenue column over in column G, so I want to select from G2 to G46. I'll click on G2, use the Shift and up key, making sure to point to G2 to G46, and finally hitting the F4 key to make that be an absolute reference. Type the closing parenthesis, Control Enter, and we'll see that our formula totals just the East region, 273,202. Now, if we've done our job right, we should be able to copy this formula down to the next two rows, and it will calculate the total for the Central region and the West region. Fast way to copy the formula, of course, is to double-click the fill handle, scroll down a little bit, and we'll see that sure enough, we have our totals for Central, East, and West. Now, it'd be good at this point to make sure that we have all of our regions, that nothing's misspelled. If you notice that we've selected 3 cells, we can look down in the status bar in the lower right-hand corner and see the sum of those cells is 530,746. If I select all the cells in the revenue column, I should have the exact same total. I'll click on G46, again, Shift and up, and sure enough, in the lower right-hand corner, the sum of those cells is 530,746. I start to have a pretty good feeling that my SUMIF function is working, and I've captured all of the revenue in the table. Now, let's say that we want to edit this table, and instead of revenue summary by region, we want to create a revenue summary by product. I'll copy my formula down from C49 to C54, Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste. Of course, we get completely the wrong answer because there are no regions that say ABC. We're going to have to edit this formula to look at a different criteria range. The F2 key will allow us to edit the formula, and I'm going to edit to change the A's, which is the region column, to B's, which is the product column. I still want to look at the product in B54, and I still want to sum the revenue in G2 to G46. Control Enter to accept that formula. Looks like it worked. If I double-click the fill handle and copy down, again, I now have these 3 cells selected. Let's look in the status bar, and sure enough, 530,746. So we feel pretty good that this SUMIF is working. One of the very popular questions at MrExcel.com at the message board is how to do this very topic. And we explain to people how to use the SUMIF function. There's also a COUNTIF function that allows you to count records that match criteria, and people are generally thrilled with the result. But invariably, they come back a couple of days later and say, hey, this is really great, but now I need to create a table that sums revenue by region and product. Let me scroll down. They're trying to fill this table in. Well, this is where SUMIF could not do the job. They thought the SUMIF is so easy to understand, certainly there must be a way to do 2 conditions. But in Excel 2003, there was no good way to do this. Luckily, in Excel 2007, we have a great new function that will allow us to handle this problem.